From the Sky News Centre, this is Paul Murray Live.
Love you, Sherry. OK, Stockholm. I'm going to Parks on Sunday. I'm really pumped about that. We're going to be there. If you want to send us an email, outtown@skynews.com.au. Great mood tonight and lots to get to, including something you probably haven't heard about thus far. Now, as you know, Australia, 60-40, hell no to changing the Constitution and having the voice. Now, the result of this was that people believed, OK, the way things are is the way things should be. But, of course, there are many state governments that have already started a process of entering into formal legal treaties with Indigenous peoples. Now, this process has been effectively put to one side in Queensland, but it is happening in the Northern Territory and it's well and truly taking place right now in Victoria. Now, the wokest state in the Commonwealth is committed to find the words that somehow put the past behind us while making sure that the future is the best one possible for Indigenous people. At least that's the idea. Now, we've shown you about some of the things that are being put on the table as potential ideas for this treaty. Remember Auntie Jill? Well, Auntie Jill, she had 10 separate suggestions that she believed should actually be there. And among other things, it was local cultural learning places for language and culture. But then we get into the more controversial, that Indigenous people should not pay land tax, they should not pay council rates, they should not pay stamp duty. They should get no interest loans if they want to buy a house. They should have completely free university education, and there should be greater infrastructure and guaranteed seats on, among other things, local councils. In part, this is why Auntie Jill says this is needed.
But when I went to school, I learnt about the ancient Greeks. And I learnt about the Egyptians, who their mummies are 2,000 years old. Hello? What do we see at Tullamarine? And I don't mean a flag or a few paintings. I'm talking about proper culture in the landscape. We are invisible, and we are invisible in our own country.
I disagree strongly, but that was her speech to the First Nations Assembly, who in part will be negotiating this treaty. But today, even more information about what is on and off the table. And put simply, everything is on the table from the perspective of the Victorian government. Now, all of us understand the histories that we have all lived and the histories that certainly Indigenous people have lived. And yes, there needs to be some formal recognition of what has happened, but also we need to understand that the future of our country is blank pages, and it's regardless of how long you've been here, how long your ancestors have been here, that you are connected to that future. Well, the Allen government has said today that nothing is off the table, even the compulsory acquisition of private property. Now, how many times have we had this conversation from Marbo and Wick and The Voice that this would not be part of the conversation? Well, the Allen government has refused to rule out giving compulsory acquired private property to Indigenous groups and establishing seats designated for Indigenous members in the Victorian Parliament. Now, the minister who is taking care of the treaty process and has plenty to say about First Nations people as their relevant minister is a lady named Natalie Hutchins. And this is what she said when she was asked by people in a parliamentary committee today in Victoria, OK, what's too far? Quote, after 200 years of colonisation, where this state took lands away in the settlement, murdered people and took away culture and language, we are not going to be ruling anything in or out as we go into the negotiation table in regards to a treaty. Now, even if you are the most generous of heart and believe that a treaty is a necessary step in reconciliation, or at the very least putting our past behind us, at some point in time, don't we have to know what is the line that is too far? Now, Auntie Jill, when we pointed this out a few months ago, said that that's not the plan, that's just her suggestions. The government today say that there is no suggestion whatsoever about the acquisition of private property. So why not rule it out? Why not say we are going to come up with a treaty, it is going to be generous, there is going to be a level of compensation. But rule out to the people of Victoria regardless of their histories, what is or isn't on the table. There has to be a line that is too far, surely, right? Otherwise, when none of this stuff is voted on by the people of Victoria, the government of Victoria will end up negotiating on their behalf and may well negotiate on things that the people of Victoria don't want. Now, there are other places in the world that have got specific seats in their federal parliament for the Indigenous peoples of those countries. But let's imagine if that was to take place here, how would that work? Who would appoint them? Would there be Labor candidates and Liberal candidates, Greens candidates, independent candidates? Would they simply be appointed by the First Peoples Assemblies or the voices that exist in some of these more woke states? I don't know. But at this stage, it seems like we're in a treaty process where as soon as the demands start to be seen, everyone pretends they're not making demands, and the people who will be accepting most likely all of the demands are not setting any limits on the negotiation. Put a pin in it. Victoria voted no. Even woke Victoria voted no. There is a limit. We'll all have to learn about what it's going to be together, and hopefully not after it's already been signed off on. Oh, happy anniversary to the greatest Prime Minister of all time. 2 years in the job as Prime Minister after winning the federal election in 2021. And, I mean, the country's never been better, right? I mean, every single promise that was made has come true. I mean, this is the most transparent government ever. This is the government that, remember, it promised to lower the cost of living. Oh, that's right. None of all those things have actually taken place. In fact, many of it has got worse. And it's not just our hunch. The latest opinion polls, even coming from the sources that would be most sympathetic to this government, are telling us where the majority of people are, and it's not a slim majority. According to the Essential poll, which pops up in the Turnbull Times, otherwise known as The Guardian, 68% of people say that inflation has increased in the past 12 months. 65% of people say that their interest rates have increased in the past 12 months. And 55% of people have said that government debt has increased. Now, all of those things are facts. I'm not entirely sure why it's not 100%, but still, 70% of people feel that inflation is worse in the second year of this government, even worse than the massive increase in the first year, let alone the interest rate pain and squeeze which is taking place as we speak. But just 1 week ago tonight, the federal budget was handed down by Jim Chalmers. The theatrics were that every Labor MP was giving a standing ovation. This is amazing, we've fixed everything. With too little, too late tax cuts and $25 a month that you won't see on your power bill. So again, is it just the cynical, jaded mind of a bearded bloke on Sky News that cannot see the genius of this budget? Well, no. Same poll, same people. Just 27% of people believe that this budget will have a meaningful impact on cost of living. 7 out of 10 don't. Because 7 out of 10 know that $36 a week when it comes to tax cuts, it doesn't even begin to touch the middle, let alone the sides. And $75 a quarter or $25 a month is hardly going to actually change the world when it comes to power bills. And remember, straight after the speech took place, one of the first things to come out of my mouth in the 5 things that I noticed about the budget, which feels like a long time ago, but it was 1 week ago tonight, 1 week ago, was in service of the slogan of every household power and every worker tax cut. The reality was when it comes to the tax cut, it's not going to be enough. It's too little too late. And when it comes to the power bills, every household includes mansions. The mansions in the capital cities or some of the most cashed up people amongst us. The argument at the time apparently was that means testing was unnecessary because everyone on the income spectrum is feeling issues when it comes to cost of living. Then it came out 2 days later. The reality was it was too expensive to means test it. Well, guess what? Again, the vast majority of Australians think about the budget, which is just 1 week old tonight, and the idea that the power bills in mansions are being treated the same as people in housing commission. 60% say the policy is wrong and it should be redirected specifically to low and middle income homes. These, by the way, the low and middle income homes, are the same people who 12 months ago in the budget had $1,500 torn out of their hot little hands as an automatic tax return. So this government is not focusing on what they say it does. 2 years in, the gaping chasm between their promises at an election, let alone their rhetoric as a government. And can I strongly commend, Chris Kenny for going chapter and verse through all the lies, all of the obfuscation of the past 2 years. I'll be posting that up on our socials, but otherwise go look for it at skynews.com.au. Sensational editorial. All the others were great as well, but Chris's on this particular topic really stood out to me. Now, of course, when it comes to interest rates, remember that was all the Reserve Bank's fault, and that's only that evil Philip Lowe, who's been sacked a long time ago, only to be replaced by his deputy who actually increased rates as well. But all of the reason that interest rates are going up is nothing to do with domestic affairs. It's all to do with Ukraine or Gaza. Well, guess what? Even in the Sydney Morning Herald, The Age and the Brisbane Times, 52% of people say that interest rates are mainly about domestic factors in Australia. 66% of coalition voters know it. More than half of other voters and even 36% of Labor people know the government isn't telling the truth about why interest rates keep going up. Oh, it's international factors. It's here. And who's in charge of the economy here? Old mate Albo with his Albonomics, which means bugger all tax cut for you, but a brand new private plane for him and another one for his ministers. $400 million on private jets. Oh, and of course, people living in the ritziest suburbs of all, they can get a power bill cut that they won't notice. Now, of course, in reply, Peter Dutton, I think, was able to change the subject very quickly, just 2 days after the budget. Again, this is all just last week. I know it all feels like a month ago, but it was 1 week ago. And Peter Dutton made it very clear about what he believed to be some of the great problems of the country. Well, guess what? The ABC and its fact checkers were sent out with a job, and that was to prove that Peter Dutton was lying, that the Aussie version of Donald Trump was race baiting, and their so-called fact check organisation was sent off to run the ruler over statements like this.
More than 16,000 businesses around the country have gone insolvent since the 1st of July 2022. Behind each of those is a family who may have lost their home but certainly have lost their savings.
And they found that he was telling the truth. At the time, insolvency figures were released by the Australian Securities and Investment Commission. They showed that there was indeed a threefold increase in the number of manufacturing insolvencies in the first 6 months. Well, then, of course, Peter Dutton talked about health. He was a former health minister, and he talked about some of the great problems happening there as well.
People's health and wellbeing are suffering. Indeed, when I became health minister in 2013, we inherited a bulk billing rate from Labor of 73% and increased it to 84%. When we left government, bulk billing was 88.5%. What Labor tried to hide in its budget, and a figure that wasn't mentioned by the Treasurer, is that bulk billing has decreased under Labor to 77%, an 11% drop. Always look at what Labor does, not what they say they will do.
Well, knock me down with a feather. The Leader of the Opposition, the alternative Prime Minister, was telling a dirty, great, big truth. Fact-checking again from the ABC. The latest data released last week, shows that in the year of March to 2024, 77% of GPs were bulk billing. It was 85% when Labor became the government 2 years ago tonight. And what about inflation?
On comparative inflation, Australia is worse than the US, Singapore, Germany, Spain, Japan, the Netherlands, Italy, South Korea, Canada, France and the entire euro area.
You can imagine the streamers that were going off when the fact checkers were able to find it was yet again the truth. In quarterly data for March 2024 shows Australia's headline inflation rate is 3.6% over the preceding 12 months. It is indeed above that of the OECD economies that Mr Dutton mentioned. Oh, I'm not finished. And then when it came to power bills,
Electricity bills haven't gone down by $275, as was pledged on 97 occasions. They've skyrocketed.
Now, you and I know this to be the absolute fact. You and I know this to be the truth. However, the fact checkers say they can't rule on this one because the pledge from Labor is about 2025 and it's not 2025 yet. But even then, remember, the Treasurer has already openly said the 275 promise, which, by the way, would be the permanent change to your bills, not just sugar hit of the $300, which they're going to pump out between now and the next federal election, in massive $75 a quarter or $25 a month increments. I mean, thank goodness. The Treasurer, of course, has turned around and said, yeah, that promise doesn't really count.
The number you're referring to is a forecast in 21 about an outcome in 25. We're providing energy bill relief in the here and now. We did in the last budget. We are again in the next budget, but there'll be more relief for more people in this budget.
Extraordinary, truly extraordinary. It was 1 week ago. 1 week ago. Feels like 3 weeks and maybe even longer. That's why it's worth actually following what the people end up saying, what the pundits end up saying, and even what the fact checkers have been able to see here. Notice they didn't do that for the budget, though. Wonder why. Meantime, on social media and the excellent campaign which is being waged by an awful lot of people around the country right now, including Fitzy and Whipper on Nova in Sydney, all the way through to the Telegraph, the Herald Sun, the Courier Mail, the Adelaide Advertiser, the Hobart Mercury, which is to get our kids off social media and try to limit it once they become teenagers. Now, surprise, surprise, the Prime Minister, well, he's had plenty to say today, but where was he a couple of weeks ago when it was Peter Malinauskas saying that we should introduce age limits to access it, or Chris Minns in New South Wales, who was saying it as late as yesterday? Well, Prime Minister spotting that the bandwagon is moving. The bandwagon is moving. He now officially cares about what he has never shown an interest in until other people came up with the idea.
We put in the budget money for a trial, essentially, of how we can restrict age restrictions, how it can be effective. That will take place. We want to make sure that any changes that are made actually work. The internet is difficult. I don't look at the comments on my social media because if I did, I'd find it difficult to leave the house in the morning.
Oh, diddums. He was fine, of course, when the internet was piling on the person he was trying to get rid of a couple of years ago. But, whatever. That was all personal. Now everything's cyclical. That was some very Weasley words. The Prime Minister says, in the budget we put some money aside to check age verification. That's not for social media. Remember, that's one of the very few things that came out of a National Cabinet meeting about domestic violence. And that was about a trial on age-limiting access to pornography. So he's trying to pretend that a policy that has nothing to do with social media is one that he's already funded because he expects that you're not going to be able to follow the bouncing ball or people that were driving around listening to FM radio this morning. I mean, that's the slipperiness of this bloke. Now, this guy has chaired many a National Cabinet meeting where all of the states and all of the territories can get together. He's had a National Cabinet meeting since Peter Malinauskas made the suggestion about age verification and access to social media. Yet was it discussed when all of the territory and state leaders were in the room? No. When they were all in the room, did he say, just like John Howard did after Port Arthur, let's all pass the same piece of paper that says that if somebody has form as a domestic violence perpetrator, there is no option for bail? Nope. He just thinks that he can slide money that's really about this and pretend that it's about that. He comes out and says there's a press conference for $5,000 for emergency payments to people that are domestic violence victims. That doesn't kick in until the 1st of July, not this year, next year. And again, as Chris pointed out on his show today, and many hosts have over the past 2 years, this bloke, who claimed he would be totally responsible for every decision that is made, has endlessly lied, changed the subject, or just straight out gaslit people. That was a disgrace what he did on the radio today. But at least he's starting to say the policy's a good idea, but he's not putting any money behind it. Now, we know one of the favourite words of the left when they lose an argument is that apparently people fall for a swear word starting in M.
Misinformation.
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 The misinformation which is there.
Some misinformation.
So they're now trying to censor the internet, where anyone, including the minister, can say what they see on the internet is not the official line. So therefore, it's adjudicated by a bunch of bureaucrats who will decide if it is or isn't misinformation, you know, government's version of the truth. And then they'll turn around and put a fine on a social media company if the post stays up after the complaint has been lodged with them. The idea here is not to stop fake news, it's to stop inconvenient truths. Because you see, after a while, social media companies, if they keep getting complaints about certain websites, they just won't host those certain websites. Could even well be YouTube videos of people who, well, push back against the government narrative and do what we do here each and every night, which is use the data to prove that they are lying. Well, there's a new participant in the want to censor the internet, and it is, in my view, a concerning one. It's the Australian Electoral Commission. Now, Australia has an electoral system that we trust. And I think in part of the reason why we trust it is because we do not know the political affiliations or even complaints about wider society from the people who take care of our elections. Now, the AEC is not perfect, but there's certainly no need for people to have an attitude about the Australian electoral process that some people have had about other countries' processes in recent elections. Now, the misinformation conversation was brought up today, as you saw, by the boss of the Electoral Commission, who was giving evidence today to a parliamentary inquiry. Let's read along here. In an appearance before the committee into adopting artificial intelligence on Monday, the Australian Electoral Commission boss said that there had been a trend among social media organisations to moderate misinformation in the public square rather than remove it from their platforms entirely. Remember, a lie or defamation is one thing. Misinformation is just simply what the government doesn't approve of. We've noticed less willingness from the social media companies to remove content that we think in some cases may breach our own standards or is indeed harmful to our staff. Now, anyone who's making threats against the Electoral Commission, obviously that should be dealt with in the same way that any threat against any public official. I have no problem with that. He says that we've seen issues where threats online that previously would have been removed were less likely to be removed. Now, that's interesting. And nobody's going to stand up for a system that allows people to be intimidated that are the people that put themselves forward to administer our elections. But forgive me, if the person who is using the misinformation word in tacit support of greater attempts to censor the internet is the same organisation that was fine with this lie being shown night after night, hour after hour on television, forgive me if I don't exactly scream to their cause when they say misinformation is destroying our democracy.
Everybody knows you don't set up a Medicare privatisation task force unless you aim to privatise Medicare.
Great man, but that was a wicked lie, an absolutely wicked lie. Now, for the past couple of summers, as we get ready for them, the Bureau of Meteorology has been out and about telling us the summers are going to be hotter and hotter than ever before and more bushfires and climate change. You know, you've heard it all before. But, of course, for the past couple of summers, it's rained cats and dogs. Certainly that's the case 2 summers ago, the last summer. Even The Guardian was reporting that Melbourne's weathers, without a hot day in January, was the longest stretch since the 1980s. But get ready, because yet another warning is telling us that the most likely the heat of the summer will result in power blackouts. Why? Because if we actually have a proper Australian summer, then people are going to really want to turn on their air conditioners. But of course, because we have made the dumb decisions to move from the system that, yes, pollutes but still works, to the new one that doesn't pollute as much, but certainly the construction of it is quite the issue, that doesn't produce as much power as the old system that pollutes, we're in a bit of a spot of bother. You see, we've been blowing up the stuff that worked, replacing it with not enough of the stuff that apparently will work, but the cost of that transition is at least $1 trillion. So we are warned yet again that as we move into the extremes of summer, and to be honest, I think we should be focused on the extremes of winter as it gets cold and people turn on their heaters, but still, while new generation and storage capacity continues to increase, project development and commissioning delays are impacting reliability throughout the horizon. So put simply, we have gone from a sturdy old car that, yes, at times is inefficient, yes, at times has been polluting, no question. But that car can still race. But instead, we have been told that so Australia can do its bit about 1% of global emissions, while China can continue to pollute until 2030, and it's more than 30 times what we do. We must transition to the car that's only got 3 wheels, and it'll still win Bathurst. And if you say it won't, misinformation. And what about Chris Bowen? Again, just like the Prime Minister, he's twisting and turning the facts to make it seem like you can ignore those people who say we're going to have blackouts because, as he says, for the past 2 summers, we haven't had blackouts. But also, Blackout Bowen, that would be because we haven't had hot days. But don't let that get in the way of your spin.
Lots of people said there were going to be blackouts this last summer. Peter Dutton and Ted O'Brien wandered around saying there were going to be lights going out and causing all sorts of fear in the community. There were no blackouts caused by a lack of electricity. We had issues with cyclones and transmission towers falling over. That can happen to anyone.
Don't you love it? Again, their play is to the people that are kind of not even paying attention. They've got other stuff in them. If you are paying attention like you do every single night, these people are infuriating. 2 years of this stuff. We'll see what happens whenever there's an election, whether it becomes a majority government, which will get even worse in its second term, a minority government, which will be pushed even further to the left in its second term, or we'll see what happens. But it's going to be a cluster, seriously. Now, again, remember, the reason that there haven't been the blackouts is because the summers haven't been hot enough. They haven't been the regular run of the high 30s, at times low 40s days. None of those things pleasant. Instead, replaced with, the past 2 summers, rain as far as the eye could see. Oh, and speaking of great green ideas, which won't cost that much money but will have incredible results. Remember when the Ghost was all about Snowy 2.0? And the Ghost was saying that the new version of the Snowy Mountain scheme, it'll change the world. Well, today, Australia has spent billions on Snowy 2.0, but an energy expert has come forward to say that the massive project may never actually produce 1 watt of power. Another energy expert was on telly with us this afternoon, explaining that the process, which is behind time and way over budget, could well be even further in both, because guess what? The tunnel boring machines still are breaking down.
Florence, of course, the tunnel boring machine, now legendary, is stuck again. So we're up to $8.5 billion. When the project was announced, it was not to cost the taxpayer anything at all. It was a $2 billion project to be completed in 4 years.
You would think these people, when they are this wrong, kind of turtle away. Instead, I know what I'm doing, and P.S. thank you for the $300 off my power bill for my pink cars. Now, I want to take a couple of minutes to explain to you what has been happening in the past couple of days with the Donald Trump trial in the United States. Now, as you know, it is all about not the porn star, not the sex, not even the non-disclosure agreement. It is about how all of that was accounted for in the books. So this trial that really shouldn't have gone as long as it has gone for the best part of a month. One person was served up by the prosecution to be the one who proved that Donald Trump knew how the books were being kept. Now, the bookkeeper from the Trump organisation has not been called as a witness because the expectation is that he may well end up siding with Donald Trump. So we are left with the former fixer, Michael Cohen. Now, this bloke went from super Trump loyalist to Trump hater. He lied. He spent time in jail. You know the story in and around this bloke. But he is the guy, because he has close proximity to Trump, that the guy who Alvin Bragg, the prosecutor, believes seals the deal. That he will be able to join the dots that they have so desperately tried to push together for years and years and years. Well, the key moment of the evidence that Trump knew how it was all being accounted for was when Michael Cohen said that he called Donald Trump at a specific time on a specific day. But then it turns out that he's not telling the truth. Last week we learned that text messages showed that he was texting the bodyguard for Donald Trump, and within seconds of those text messages, he rang the bodyguard for Donald Trump. But the text messages weren't about Donald Trump.
Defense attorney Todd Blanche zeroed in on a phone call in October 2016, days before the election. Cohen previously testified he called Trump's bodyguard Keith Schiller to get Trump on the line, and then he and Trump finalized the plan for Cohen to pay off Daniels. But Blanche said that wasn't the real reason for the call, producing text messages suggesting Cohen was actually calling Trump's bodyguard to complain he was getting prank calls from a 14-year-old. Blanche insisted Cohen misled the jury when he testified the call was about the hush money.
So he's gone to jail for lying before. He's lied to this court because the prosecution left out the reason that he rang the president's bodyguard. And how long did he end up speaking to the president's bodyguard? 90 seconds.
Trump's defense pointed out the call in question was 96 seconds, but Cohen stuck to his story, insisting it covered both the prank phone calls he received and the hush money scheme.
Sure it did. Because anyone who's seen Michael Cohen answer a question on television or rant on the internet knows he's very economical with his language. You don't think he was taking the bulk of the 90 seconds, if not, in reality, the entire 90 seconds, to bitch and moan about the 14-year-old that was prank calling him? Smoking gun 1, gone. Smoking gun 2 was that Michael Cohen was a man who was loyal to Trump while he was working for him. He did everything Trump wanted him to do. Except it has come out that while working for Donald Trump, he stole tens of thousands of dollars from Donald Trump, skimming off the top of part of the money that was supposedly part of the whole Stormy Daniels thing. Now, let me show you why it is important that you watch lots of different places for your news, and why I often talk about news, i.e. what happened today, versus narrative, good guy, bad guy, like you saw the Trump lawyer, evil face, because, you know, everything Trump's terrible. Here's how Fox News reacted to Michael Cohen admitting to stealing from Donald Trump when he worked for him.
Yeah, to show that he actually stole from the Trump organization, even as they were structuring a deal to pay him $35,000 a month, is an enormous big deal.
Now let's move to the left. CNN couldn't hide that this was a big part of the trial.
The fact that he was never charged with larceny is important, because stealing $60,000 through fraud, which would be larceny in New York State, is more serious of a crime than falsifying business.
But right out there to the left, you get the right out there, MSNBC, where they only interview prosecutors or people who used to work for prosecutors who think every single thing about this trial proves that Donald Trump is guilty. Now remember, the trial is the bookkeeping and the intention of the bookkeeping. They won't call the bookkeeper, so they found the bloke who would say anything and literally lies, and then, if he's not lying, he's admitting to stealing money, is their star witness. On MSNBC, this is how they explain Cohen stealing from Trump as nothing to see here.
He asked about the $50,000 that's irrelevant to the $130,000, and that's where he very effectively got Michael Cohen to agree that, yes, he stole $30,000. Later, when Cohen was asked about that on redirect by the prosecution, it didn't really sound like stealing $30,000. It sounded a lot like Michael Cohen doing the little that he could within that calculation to rebalance the bonus he thought he deserved, and it still came out as less than the bonus he thought he deserved and the bonus he'd gotten the year before.
He didn't steal, he just rebalanced. That's narrative. That's not news. Quick break. Back with a great discussion this evening, and Nigel Farage will join us to talk about this case and a whole lot more. Thanks for watching us tonight here on Paul Murray Live. I've been looking forward to this all week. None other than the current wonderful senator that is the delightful Holly Hughes, who should be in the parliament for as long as she wants. She's an excellent advocate for all people in her state of New South Wales. Good?
Thank you, darling.
All right. And Stephen Conroy, who, if at any time he wants to get back in the parliament, please, so a little bit of sense back there for Labor in the meantime doing his bit.
Vote one Holly.
That's it.
Vote one Holly is all I have to say.
Stephen, bring you back to the Senate. You double the IQ of the Labor Senate team.
Vote one Holly.
Straight away, Dom.
Exactly. All right. So I just want to go slightly left field here by talking about what the AEC was talking about today, and again, this sort of concept of misinformation and AI and all the rest of it here. Holly, I think, and I know that the AEC claims that there's been a little bit of a sort of stop the steal style thing that's been popping up on the internet, on the absolute fringes about our electoral system. No serious person would think there is anything but a great working system here. But I think one of the reasons why we trust our system is because the people that are in charge of it don't really get involved in sort of topic du jour like misinformation.
No, absolutely. I mean, we still vote in that very sensible way of a piece of paper with a pencil, and we stick it in the box ourselves. There's no computers, there's no hanging chads, there's no different systems across the different states. It's all very, very uniform with a pencil and a piece of paper. I noticed in your editorial you did refer to Mediscare,
yes,
the greatest piece of misinformation that's ever been put out.
I think it's one of Stephen's best, personally.
Well, it's actually, on a serious policy note, it's actually set back reform of any Medicare that anyone will ever be able to undertake, basically, this generation, because this Mediscare, and it was let run by the AEC. So it seems to me they're very worried about misinformation when it damages the Labor Party, not so worried when it's the Labor Party lying about the Liberal Party.
So, Stephen, again, you know, the integrity of the system matters. The AEC is not perfect. The Western Australian revote anyone, but we absolutely stand by the system and the integrities of it. I just get a little nervous when the sort of what should be faceless-like people running it start to get into the stuff like balls and strikes on misinformation.
Yeah, look, I think you may need to just put the tinfoil hat back into the drawer for a minute, because look, there's three different things, Paul, that you're referring to, okay? One of them I think you've got a legitimate, issue with. Two of them I think you're conflating in with the third, which leads you to this. So firstly, public servants aren't as nuanced as you and I and Holly at the way they use language, okay? So the two issues that I think are fair for the Electoral Commission to have a concern about is, as they do today in I'll call it the physical world. If you put an ad in a newspaper and you don't authorise it, if you direct people to vote informal by misleading them with information, the Electoral Commission deal with that today in the real physical world.
Yes.
So I don't have a problem with the AEC wanting to make sure that just because you're hiding behind a false name on the internet, you get to mislead Australian voters about how to vote, how to participate, and how to vote formally. Okay, so I think there's a bucket that I think it's fair. Now, he is probably, in my view, referring to some of those things, misinformation. Then there's a second bucket, which you will see more of a grey, and I don't see it as a grey. And that is the sort of disinformation which has started to appear in American elections, where third-party state actors, say a China, say a North Korea, say a Russia...
Sure, but he didn't talk about Russia.
...start to want to mislead No, but we are, unfortunately, we're beginning to see the same sort of interference in online propaganda. And I'd actually just say the word propaganda rather than misinformation. But I'm being a little bit more colourful. Okay, so the sort of propaganda...
we might send everyone to sleep soon talking anymore about the AIC. And
exactly. So, but Paul is making a good point, because it's important to understand his language. And so that sort of propaganda misinformation is seriously eroding confidence in democracies around the world.
Imagine if people had to show their driver's licence when they vote to prove their identity. That'd be crazy, wouldn't it?
I don't understand how the electoral roll
we have
isn't
such
an iPad
proven.
where you go like this and your name is off on every booth. But look, the reason I wanted to mention
it... But is that Labor mantra?
We have
vote
such
early,
proven
vote
evidence behind your suggestion. We have such proven evidence. I mean, I've been on the committee that's examined elections.
How many dead people voted last time?
You know, almost none. So just stop pretending.
Almost none. Okay? That's comforting.
There's actual inquiries after every election. There's an inquiry into these sort of claims. Not one of them over 30 years in my time in politics ever found anything of substance.
So look, the reason I wanted to talk about it was, again...
wanted to change the subject.
No, of course. I'm just trying to, again, rather than this stuff and you learn about it the wrong way, I wanted to talk about it head on here this evening. We could go all night. We've only got a couple of minutes here to do this. The ICC has dropped the hammer about the process leading towards a potential war crimes trial for the Prime Minister of Israel and the leadership of Hamas. Now, everyone's heard that all night, but what you need to know is Israel doesn't recognise the ICC, Qatar doesn't recognise the ICC, so even if they make those suggestions, no one's going to be dragged before the ICC. But the response to it is what is worth talking about here. Holly, Prime Minister today says, I can't talk about it because it's a court case, as if he was affecting a jury somewhere. Please.
I know, like even sleepy Joe Biden managed to come out and say a couple of coherent sentences. I mean, miracles do happen. I think there was 2 miracles today. The first one is Joe Biden managed a full sentence. But disgrace was Albanese and the way that he was incapable of actually taking a position. Obviously, Peter Dutton came out very strongly in support of Joe Biden. I mean, it is abhorrent to put Hamas and Benjamin Netanyahu on the same playing field. That is putting President Bush and bin Laden, that is putting Hitler and Churchill in the same sort of framework. It's absolutely disgraceful. And the ICC, they have no credibility left after this, and Australia should withdraw its membership.
Yeah, so Stephen, to that end, right, this process is obviously going to keep going for a little while. I do find it amazing that as serious as all of this topic was, much of the media was talking about George Clooney's wife. OK, guys, could we focus on it for 2 hours before we start to move on? What did you think today?
Look, I think it's an absolute disgrace. I think I have a lot of sympathy for what Netanyahu said today about, the heinous attack committed by Hamas unequivocally needs to be condemned. But Israel's right to self-defence cannot be put at risk by this ruling. It is very simple. Now, having said that, I have repeatedly said I think Netanyahu should resign. He's got his own cabinet ministers saying pretty much the same thing, and he's got mass demonstrations against him. But that's a proper process. That's a proper legitimate debate. Correct. It is a disgrace what happened today, and they should have... I'm hoping that the court just dismisses the actual hearing, because it is unacceptable for Hamas to be put in a bucket with Netanyahu.
All right. Thank you, guys. Do appreciate it. Vote 1 Holly Hughes and vote twice for Stephen Conroy, because that's a good Labor thing to do. All right. Thank you, guys. Do appreciate it. Quick break. Back with more here. Nigel Farage joins us next here to talk about that Trump trial. And we're going to talk about the judge. We're really going to talk about the judge, because Trump's right. He is out of line. I have been waiting to talk to Nigel Farage, and he's, funnily enough, exactly where we need him right now to do so. None other than the great GB News host, the freedom fighter, the lovely man that is there for us in London. Now, Nigel, the Trump trial plays out in the middle of the night here, so I'm not getting a lot of sleep at the moment because I'm watching every little increment of it. Earlier in the show, I went into great chapter and verse about the Cohen stuff. But can we talk about this judge? Because when the defence got a chance to call its first witness, he brings the hammer down and starts carrying on about them. He has extended the end of the trial till potentially next week. This guy is putting the finger on the scale in an incredible... you just have to watch one day to see it.
Well, absolutely. And I mean, look at the Stormy Daniels testimony. This case wasn't about what may or may not have happened, but of course he allowed her to go on and on and on because she's obviously making money off the back of these salacious stories. So, no, the judge is awful, and the judge is openly political, and the judge has been in the past very verbally anti-Trump, and it just shows you, great country that America is, its judicial system is now politicised and rotten to the core, and Judge Engeron absolutely shows all of that. And who knows where this goes, because I don't think that any jury in its right mind, having listened to the key witness, that scumbag Cohen, can possibly find a guilty verdict. But if they did, would the judge send him to prison? I don't think it's going to happen, but given the hatred, given the bias, given the Trump derangement syndrome, anything's possible.
Yeah, look, even if it's a 30-day thing, we'll all see what happens. But also about Cohen, so this guy, they were able to very effectively say that this guy was saying, when I was working for Trump, I was super loyal to Trump. You were stealing from Trump. And then afterwards, the misremembering of the telephone conversation, yet still you turn on lefty media, they think that that's still a smoking gun. The texts prove that within seconds of the bodyguard saying, call me, he did, about a 14-year-old prankster.
Yeah, I mean, look, he's a cheat, he's a liar, and he's a thief. I mean, unreliable witness would be the gentlest way one could possibly put this. No jury can possibly take him seriously. As you say, the texts disprove everything he said. Honestly, the more people in America that see this, the better this trial is coming out for Trump. I mean, who would have believed that Trump is actually picking up support? He's going up in the polls. His price with the bookmakers is shortening. No, this is all working in Trump's favour, and I feel sorry for my friend because he's got to sit through weeks and weeks of this agony when he should be out there campaigning. But it's all coming together. I'm feeling more bullish now about a Trump victory on November the 5th than I have at any point in the last couple of years. Yeah, and I mean, relentlessly, the state-by-state polling, it's showing the change where it's more like 16 than it's going to be like 20. Yeah. Now, GB News cops it from every possible angle in the UK because you push back, right? Because you question the narrative, because you offer the alternative voice, right? And some of the most despicable things have been said by the elite there. The ecosystem of the media has been disrupted by GB News. How dare they? But Ofcom, the people who regulate the process, any opportunity to put the hammer down on you guys, they do. Yes, but they've got this one wrong. So we had Rishi Sunak with a debate with the public, an audience with Rishi Sunak with the public. We hired a firm to find an independent, neutral audience of undecideds. They got to ask their questions of the Prime Minister. We didn't intervene. It was literally Sunak debating with the public. But that apparently breaches Ofcom rules because, of course, the industry want one of their own to be the star of the show, not what we did to provide a format for the great British public. And they've come after us. They've said within 60 days there'll be a sanction. And you know what? We're offering this to Keir Starmer. We're offering this format to every other party leader. Tony Blair did one of these on the BBC in 2005, exactly the same. There was no problem then, but there is now. And what this is about, it's about an established industry who do not like an upstart, who do not like a newcomer. And what they particularly hate is that we put the public at the very top. The public were the stars of that show, not somebody who's worked in the TV industry for the last 30 years. So I tell you what, if they try and fine us or sanction us on this, it will backfire on them very, very badly indeed. Yeah, it's extraordinary. I mean, we've done a version of the pub test or the People's Forum here for the best part of, 15, 20 years. Yeah, exact same model being repeated there, and it breaches the rules because there's not a gatekeeper feeding them. Watch GB News on the Flash app or find all of the highlights of the wonderful Nigel Farage online as well. Thank you, mate. We'll see you again next week. Thank you.
The great man joining us from London. Quick break, back with more. About 4 minutes away from the late debate. And I tell you what, Liz Storer, wound up tonight. All right, I'm done. The wonderful Megan Kelly joins us tomorrow night, and here they are, the late debate.